Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Ilene, and I'm an alcoholic. I brought my own drink. You can never be too careful. There's already one up here, but you'd never know. Boy, this is high. I'm a little afraid of heights. This is very weird. Well, could you see me if I move the box away? I'll stand on the box. It's okay. Just get freaked out. I would like to thank. I'd like to thank Kate. Did Kate leave? She's gone. And the committee. She probably had to go to the restroom. I don't blame her. I have to go too. But I always have to go. I take this stuff called Detrol LA, but it doesn't really work that well. You know that stuff they have on the commercials? You can't hear me at all? Now I'll get off the box. Okay, the box is going. Bye-bye, box. I was going to say, where's my roadie? How about now? Can you hear me now? Well, I just used up all my best material. I'm not in charge of the heat. I've been told I'm not in charge of anything. Such an incredible relief. I thought I was in charge of everything. Anyway, okay, I'll start over. My name is Ilene, and I am an alcoholic. Hi. Very delighted to be here. I like to come to Oregon. I get imported every once in a while, come here, and I do want to thank the committee and Kate and everyone who's responsible for getting me here. My sobriety date is March 3rd, 1975, which means that I am now sober 7 years longer than I was alive when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's pretty awe-inspiring. I came to AA actually the first time in 1974. I was 23 years old. There were not a lot of young people in Alcoholics Anonymous. There were not a lot of incredibly attractive young people like we see in Alcoholics Anonymous now. I was a fairly, or shall I say, very unattractive young person when I came to AA. Much of it had to do with how I looked. I weighed about 230 pounds of that beautiful red-faced wine bloaty thing. I was wearing a $5.99 granny dress from one of our local discount stores. I had a pair of flip-flops. I had a really bad haircut that I think I performed on myself. And I had an incredibly bad attitude. And I'm here to tell you that I don't understand why anybody would come to AA with a good attitude. I mean, think about it. My life had been lousy for a long time, and I didn't really see how coming to AA would change any of that. And, you know, I was sitting out here today, this evening, and I was blown away by the countdown and by the lady here with the 53 years. And I saw a 50-year cake on last Wednesday night. A great lady named Angie Trejo, who lives in my area, whose slogan is "The ego's not your amigo." And she's a wonderful lady. And boy, I'll tell you, a 50-year cake is very impressive. It's got a lot of fire on it, and I get overwhelmed at the idea that, and I was listening very intently to the reading of chapter 5 also, and And I get very overwhelmed that I'm one of those people who actually got to stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that I continue to be one of those people who gets to stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that I want to be here, and every year that I'm here, I want to be here more. And every year that I'm here, I value my sobriety more than I ever have before, because it means more to me, and because as life goes on, the outside things actually become more troubling. You know, they don't become less troubling, but the interior life actually becomes better able as the years go on to deal with it. And that which I can't deal with, I can bring to a meeting, and you can help me get through any of the events of my life. When I was new, my first sponsor, who was Bob Earl, said to me, if you can find one other person who has ever felt the way you felt or done the thing you've done, then you could relax, because you would know that you weren't alone. And what I've discovered in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I don't need to just know what you did before you got here. I need to know what you have been through since you've been here, so that I can get the strength and hope from you to know that I can get through whatever it is also. And that's been very meaningful to me. You know, my time in Alcoholics Anonymous has been incredibly interesting. It's been very interesting. It's been very fulfilling. It's been very surprising. It's been very difficult from time to time. But, you know, that's just life. And, you know, and I've learned that I'm really no different from anybody else. You know, I'm not one of those people who believes that there's us and them, you know, that there's us and the normies, or, you know, I mean, I think that we have a disease. And we're very fortunate that our disease can be arrested by practicing this program, you know? We're very fortunate. You know, I'm sure my father, who survived colon cancer, which was a miracle, would have preferred to go to meetings than go through surgery and chemotherapy, you know, and but, you know, he has a disease, and he had a disease, and it doesn't make him any different from anybody else. He's just, you know, him, and then he had cancer, and I'm me, and I have alcoholism. And, you know, I didn't grow up to be an alcoholic. I certainly, well, let me just say this. I'm a Jew from Idaho. You should know that about me. I live in California, but I'm a true Pacific Northwesterner, and I am going home. I'm not moving up here. My brother is a part-time Waldportian. Anyway, I did spend one really drunk night in Roseburg once, as I recall. I was on my way up to Washington, and I'd been in Oakland the night before and had many, 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 many drinks in a bar, and then got up the next morning and took a lot of speed and drove to Roseburg, Oregon. And I was in a terrible state when I got there, so I don't have any recollection of Roseburg other than the fact that I really felt like hell. But anyway, and then I moved on to Washington. But anyway, I'm a Jew from Idaho. My parents are from the Bronx, which is a much more acceptable place for Jews to be from. But my dad was in the Marine Corps, and he ended up in Boise, Idaho, because he told them he had a place to live in New York. And anyway, he was a Marine Corps recruiter, and then he became an announcer on the radio, and he announced the minor league baseball, and he was a disc jockey. And they lived there for 10 years, and when I was 4 years old, we moved to Los Angeles, and I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, but I left the valley before Valley Girls started talking funny, so you don't have to listen to that. And I was the star of my grammar school. I was literally the star of my grammar school. I excelled at everything but physical education and interpersonal relationships. And I was destined for greatness, and I peaked at 11 and a half. And it's pretty much downhill from there. And, you know, and I was a really weird kid. You know, I was a really weird kid in spite of the fact that I was born with everything you were supposed to have in order to make it. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. I had looks and talent and brains and opportunity and a supportive family and an incredible amount of potential and genius IQ, and I was a 10th grade reader in the 3rd grade, and and everybody expected great things of me. The only thing is, I was also born with alcoholism, and from what I understand, and I'm no expert on alcoholism, or I'm not even an expert on my own alcoholism, it changes from year to year, but 10% of the population approximately is born with alcoholism. And one of the things that I know about alcoholism for sure is that it is no respecter of persons. Alcoholism doesn't care if you're young or old. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It doesn't care about your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your religious beliefs or lack thereof. It doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. If you've got alcoholism, you've got it. And for me, alcoholism manifests itself in the fact that when I take a drink, I have no control over what's going to happen next. And our book describes me to a T. It says that we are men and women who like the effect produced by alcohol. I happen to love the effect produced by alcohol. Now, I'm very lucky because, I don't think that we're meant to identify with every single line, sentence, word of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just my opinion, and anything that I say up here is my opinion. The paragraph in the big book with which I identify the least is the first paragraph of chapter 3. Now, I'm not somebody who has memorized the big book. I just happen to know this paragraph, and it says, "Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people." I have to honestly tell you, I never tried to prove that I could drink like other people. I didn't want to drink like other people. I wanted to be drunk, and I wanted other people to leave me alone. Now, I have to tell you that I grew up during the 60s, and the 60s were an incredible period of time for somebody like me, because the 60s said, get as screwed up as you want to. It is the preferable way to live, I mean, it was a badge of honor if you say, I was so wasted last night, man. I was just so wasted, like that was something to be proud of. I was wasted, and I grew up during a time where, there wasn't a lot to stand in the way of my drinking. I sort of, I pretended to go to college, or I had some, half-ass part-time job, but really my main occupation was getting loaded. That was my occupation. And I started to drink when I was about 12 years old. And I don't think I ever crossed any sort of invisible line. I think that I drank alcoholically from the start because I really loved what alcohol did for me. And the earmark of my alcoholism is not a lot of, jails and institutions and nut houses and that kind of thing. The earmark of my drinking is what happened to me on the inside, and it happened really, really fast. There were things that happened on the outside, but the things that happened on the inside were what enabled me to ignore what was happening outside, And, from the moment I started to drink, my life took a completely divergent path. And I think that there are basically two kinds of people who come to AA. There are the ones whose lives are fairly well together, and as a result of alcohol and or drugs, their lives begin to disintegrate. And then there's a group who could never get it together in the first place. And I'm one of those. Because from the moment I started to drink, that's all I really wanted to do. And from the initial potential that I had as a child, I went in a completely other direction. And all of a sudden, I'm screwing up in school, and I'm cutting school, and I'm running away from home, and I'm starting to hang out with people that I had never seen before in my life, and I'm starting to get in cars with people and sniffing glue and going to parties and finding guys who will buy me liquor and doing things in exchange, favors for favors. And, I am no stranger to what they describe in our book as pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And it also says in our book that women are often gone beyond recall in a few short years. And I was really a child who was gone beyond recall in a few short years. I mean, I started drinking when I was like 12 years old. And I don't know if you've looked at a 12-year-old recently. I'm leaving here. I've already made my amends to Karen. I'm leaving here first thing in the morning because I am going over to Eugene where my 12-year-old great niece Serena is going to be a flower in Snow White at the Holt Center at the ballet. And, and she's 12, and she's really basically a little girl. And I was already drinking. And I was drinking alcoholically. I mean, not every day, not all the time. I mean, it's hard to get a source when you're 12, But fortunately for me, drugs were beginning to make a big appearance, and they were a lot easier to get than liquor when you're 12. And I make no apology for the fact that I use drugs. I know that this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I am an alcoholic through and through, but I took a lot of drugs. Basically, if you're trying to get a beat on me, I like to drink that kind of wine that comes in and hovers over a grape but never quite comes in for a landing, that kind of wine. I'm a twist-top girl. I mean, to my knowledge, I've never drank any kind of wine that required a corkscrew. I have to be honest with you. And it's a good thing, too, because I used to also like to take a lot of medication intended for sleep. And, and on those bottles, if you're actually lucky enough to get some doctor who will write you a prescription, it says don't operate any heavy machinery. I assume that's your corkscrew or your crop duster, and... Anyway, basically, I like to drink cheap wine. I like to take medication intended for sleep. I like to sit in the corner and drool. Or I like to operate a motor vehicle. And I'd like to tell you I'm kidding, but I'm not. And I like to operate them in the canyon roads between Los Angeles and the San Fernando Valley. So, because there were important things that I needed to get in those canyons, and there were some bars, there were some people, there were some sources, and the fact that I didn't take myself or anybody else out on those car trips, that's living proof that there's God. And anyway, I only drank and used for 12 years, and I used to think that not much happened because there was very little that I would allow myself to acknowledge. Now, during that 12-year period, I lost my virginity at 15 to a guy that I had met that day because I knew that I was a piece of crap and nobody would ever want to marry me anyway, so what was I saving it for? When I was 17, I got pregnant on a one-night stand. I was drunk. I refused to believe that I was pregnant. It was 1968. And I had a child, and I gave him up for adoption. I signed the papers 3 days later, and I never thought about him again except maybe on his birthday until after I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was 18, I got gang raped under the influence of alcohol and barbiturates, got up the next morning and went to the beach as though nothing had happened because why would somebody like me call the police or go to the hospital? And those are the kinds of things that started happening to me, and they happened to me pretty much on a regular basis. I'm not saying I got pregnant all the time or got raped all the time, but it was a variation on a theme. And I began to live my life in a way that I never anticipated that I would live my life. I'm a nice Jewish girl from the San Fernando Valley. My parents are going to celebrate their 62nd wedding anniversary this summer. Their names are Harry and Harriet. They're a set. They have to stay together. And they're a true partnership. It's not like I didn't witness, normalcy in my own life. My brother, the part-time Wald Portian, he's going to celebrate his 40th wedding anniversary this year. And truly, I know of only 2 divorces in my parents' circle. The way people in my parents' circle break up is when one of the spouses dies. I mean, I grew up with a lot of normalcy around me, and I was the tornado running through the lives of everybody, and my parents are really decent people, but it doesn't matter because I have alcoholism, and I've tried to explain that to people. It doesn't matter where you come from or what your family background is as regards your alcoholism. Now, I have to tell you, I have some personality traits that I picked up in my family, primarily from my mother, not all of them healthy. But my alcoholism doesn't come from my family. Now, granted, my mother's father was an alcoholic. I didn't know this until my aunt, my mother's sister, who just passed away, joined our program for about 5 years and then went back to drinking. But she's the one who told me my grandfather was an alcoholic, my mother's brother was, and my father had a sister who was alcoholic who killed herself. So there was alcoholism in my family, and I have a son who's an alcoholic. And But I didn't catch it from them. It's just luck of the genetic draw is how I look at it. But anyway, I began to live my life in a way where the unacceptable somehow became the acceptable, and the untenable became the tenable, and the unlivable became the livable, because I had to somehow wrap myself around the idea that I was going to live this way, because there was really nothing that I could do about it. And one of the things that I know is that alcoholism is a disease of hopelessness and helplessness, and when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see that there's going to ever be any way out of it, because how is it ever going to change? I'm just going to live this way forever. You know, and when I was in my mid-teens, not consciously, I got an idea that whatever it was that was good or decent or worth having in life, why don't I just hang it up, because I wasn't going to have it anyway, you know? And I grew up in a time when girls were still dating the high school sweetheart, and the prom was important. And I remember I got drunk the night of the prom and made fun of everybody who went to the prom, when the truth of the matter is I wish that somebody had asked me. And that I was one of those girls in a long dress, but, nobody was going to ask somebody like me to go to the prom. I was known as like the high school slut, basically, in a time when, that was not really acceptable. And people talked about you, and they certainly talked about me. And, and then finally I got out of that high school, which I hated, and I went to college, and I found my people. I found the hippies. I found the people who were too busy going, getting loaded, rioting, and hanging out to go to class. These were my people, and I entered college in 1968 as a budding freshman. I got kicked out in 1972 as a budding sophomore. Somehow I managed to accumulate 35 units during that time. I have no idea how, because I really never went to class. And I would take like sort of the hip semester. That would be like, I would take Marxism and Zen Buddhism, and then I would take Chaucer, where we'd sit in the back of the room and drink Old English while listening to Middle English, and it was fascinating stuff. And anyway, but I loved college because it was the freedom that I was looking for. And in those years, that's when a lot of that stuff happened. That's when I got pregnant, and I dropped out for a year, and then I went back, and then, and then the rape happened, and then in 1970, somewhere in the middle of all of that, it's all like a big blur. I go to live on a commune in Washington with a guy that I knew hated me in Los Angeles, but I knew it would be better in Washington. Wasn't better, but it was certainly different. He left me after a week. Our dog died of distemper. It was a bad summer, and anyway, I ended up moving down to Creswell, Oregon, where I was living in a tent, and then somehow I ended up living with these narcs in Eugene. I don't know how. Weird stuff always happened to me, and this really nice guy rescued me. His parents owned a Christmas tree farm, and he bought me a plane ticket so I could go home to L.A. one more time to my parents' house for rest and recuperation, And, I remember when I was on the commune. Now, I have to tell you, this was not my cup of tea. Let me just say the Jews don't camp, and this place was called Tolstoy Farm. It was in Davenport, Washington, outside of Spokane, and they had no heat, no running water, no electricity. It was wild. I spoke at something up here in Oregon, and I forget what it was, but a woman came up to me and told me that she had lived on Tolstoy, and she knew this guy that I knew there. His name was Stas Jakowski. He was the good pole of the Northwest as opposed to Ted Kaczynski, but he lived in a house about the same size, and it turns out he's still living there. It's like 35 years later, and I just think he's insane. But anyway, this was not, for me. And but, you do things because you think you're supposed to, and I did a lot of things that I thought I was supposed to do. Like, I remember I was about a year and a half sober, and I got freed from the tyranny of the foreign film. I came into the program with grave intellectual pretensions. Like, I knew everything, and which I didn't, but I thought I did. And I thought I had to go to a lot of dreary foreign films. I'm not sure why. And anyway, I got asked out on a date, which was revolutionary for me, and we go to see this Ingmar Bergman film starring Liv Ullmann as a psychiatrist who's suicidal and going insane. And the guy I was out with says, every time I go to see a Bergman film, I get depressed. And I said, no kidding. I said, what are we doing here? And we go out, and we're out on the sidewalk, and I'm jumping up and down. I'm really berserk. And he said, what's wrong with you? And I said, I'm so happy. I said, I just walked out of a Bergman film. I said, any time other than this, I said, I'd be so worried that people I'd never seen before and would never see again in my life would be thinking about me walking out of the Bergman film. Like, obviously she knows nothing about art. And, because I was always so worried. I mean, even when I was a little kid, I was so self-obsessed. I was so self-involved. I was so worried about how I was impacting the planet and what people thought about me. And, the truth of the matter is, since I've been in AA, I realize that most people are not thinking about me at all. They are so busy thinking about themselves, they don't have time to think about me. And then once in a while, I enter their consciousness, just like once in a while you enter mine. And anyway, I drank more and more and more and more and took more and more drugs and became just sadder and sadder and sadder. When I came to the program, the two overwhelming emotions I had were complete and absolute self-hatred and absolute and total disappointment in the way that my life had turned out, because it wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was the kid with the bright promise, and that was the great irony of my life. I was not supposed to end up like this, but that was how I ended up. And since I've gotten to the program, a lot of my ideas about how things are supposed to be or how things should be have been radically altered, because I've gotten a completely different view of life than I would have had prior to coming to AA. And I've had a spiritual awakening of the educational variety, like they talk about in the back of the book. All they're talking about in that appendix, I think, in those 2 pages, is a change of attitude. I came to the program as a complete negative malcontent, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because the other shoe always dropped. And I've turned into a fairly positive individual since I've been here. It's amazing. We really do get to know who we are, and we get to know our strengths and our limitations and our humanness, which is the most incredible thing that's happened to me, is that I've really gotten so human. And I've never found life, by the way, to be particularly easy. Okay? I never have. Some people seem to move through life like a hot knife through cold butter. I don't happen to be one of those people. I seem to require a lot of assistance. And when I got to the program, I had a huge resentment about that, because I don't want to ask for help. The 2 hardest things that I had to learn how to say when I came to AA were, I don't know, because I thought I was supposed to know everything because everybody always told me how smart I was, and will you help me? I heard a speaker say something that I identified with so much. They said, I came to the program like this: help me. Stay as far away from me as possible, but please help me. I was not a cuddly newcomer. I didn't want you to touch me. I was prickly. My first commitment in AA, by the way, was greeting at the door of what was then the largest meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous. It was at Wilshire, Normandy, so they called it Wilshire Normandy. Isn't that genius? And they made me a greeter, and I was a hostile greeter. If you came to Wilshire, you got greeted whether you wanted to be or not, And I came to the program with no life, which is a really good way to get here, because then you have nothing to do but go to meetings. And in those days, it was a lot harder than it is now. There were nooners, and then there were meetings from 8:30 to 10, and on Wednesday and Thursday, there were meetings from 7 to 8, and then you went to the meeting from 8:30 to 10. And there were no VCRs, so you had no TiVo, and so you had to be really sincere. I missed 10 years of primetime television because I went to 9 meetings a week, and you had to fit them in the times when they had them. You had to fit them in the times when they had them. But I had this greeting commitment at Wilshire, and I remember I used to get there an hour and a half early, and I would put my keys on the floor by the door where I like to stand, and God help you if you tried to stand there, because it was my place. And what I didn't know is that I was getting seduced by Alcoholics Anonymous. I told you that I don't think our families of origin have all that much to do with with our alcoholism, but I sure think they have a lot to do with who we are. My mother, Harriet, is a very stoic woman and a secret keeper. I'll tell you a story about my mother, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything, but it's such a great story I'm going to tell you anyway. My mother comes from a generation of secret keepers, and I imagine some of the older gals here also know something about secret keeping. I've heard very interesting family secrets from different people, but my sister-in-law, who's a historian, decided she was going to do a genealogical study of my mother's family about 7 years ago. So my mother gives her my grandfather's emigration papers from Hungary, in which we discover that my grandfather, when he came to the U.S., was married to a woman who was not my grandmother, and my mother had had this half-brother named Milton. This is 7 years ago. None of us have ever heard anything about this. So I say to my mother, "Ma, did you know Milton?" She said, "Of course." She says, "You know that picture of me on the horse when I'm a baby?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "That was Milton holding the reins." I said, "Ma, what happened to Milton?" She says, "How should I know? He's probably dead. He was much older than me." I said, "Ma, how come you never told us this?" She says, "You didn't know him anyway. What difference does it make?" This is what my mother is like. She's also so she's a secret keeper and she's very stoic. Very stoic. If something happens that's tough, she wants you to get over it. I mean, like my aunt just died, her sister, her younger sister. And my aunt's husband is a complete wreck. Now, it's been like a month. He's never going to get over this. But my mother can't understand why he's not better already. You know what I mean? That happens a lot around here, too, by the way. People want you to get over it, like right away. Like if you haven't, somehow you're working a bad program. It's one of the things that bugs me more than anything. I told you this is only my opinion, but I don't think, that if somebody dies in our family, we're meant to get over it in a month, otherwise we're not working a good program. What kind of crap is that? Anyhow, we're no different. We're supposed to grieve, and we have pain, and our kids give us trouble, and our parents get sick, and people die, and we are not exempt from human emotion because we're sober. What I believe has happened to me is that I haven't had to drink or use no matter what's happened, but I'm certainly not exempt from being a human. I used to think that I would just, come in the door and, my feelings would screech to a halt and God would say, "Leave her alone, she's had enough," and the truth of the matter is, as a friend of mine says, there's a festival of feelings just waiting to fall on your head, and fortunately they don't all fall at once, I mean, I was pretty much in a coma for 12 years before I came to AA, and lots of stuff was at a standstill, and and then I had to deal with it. But anyway, getting back to my mother and this story, about 7 years ago, my dad, who is just the sweetest man on the planet, the best guy ever, there was a suspicion that he had colon cancer. They found something on his colon, which turned out to be cancer. And we knew that he was going into the hospital and he had to have surgery to have this growth removed. And we knew he'd be in the hospital for about 5 days. And, this is my mom's guy. They have been together so long. This is my mom's guy. And amazing stuff happened around my father's cancer, by the way. One of the things that happened is that because of the program, I realized it was not my movie. This was not my movie. This was not my opportunity to go to meetings and beat my chest and say, "Oh, poor me, my daddy has cancer." I mean, yeah, I felt bad, but it was not my movie. It was my parents' movie, and my job was to be a supporting player. So I called up my mother when we found out that my dad was going to the hospital, and I said, "I'm talking, you're listening," because I know what she's like. And I said, "When Daddy goes in the hospital," I said, "I'm taking off of work. I'm moving in with you. I'm driving you back and forth to the hospital. I'm making myself completely available to you for whatever you need. And you are not permitted to say no." And I heard her start to say something, and then she stopped and she said, "That would be nice." Now, when I came to the program, You would have had to stick burning bamboo shoots under my fingernails to get me to admit how thrilled I was to be here. Because I was, a tough, cool chick. But the truth of the matter was, I was so thrilled to be in a place that was this good, this warm, this decent, this wholesome, this unhip. What a great thing to be able to come in out of the cold and not have to be hip. I had this friend who used to say he was so cool, he was frozen. And I identify with that. I've spent the last 31 years of my life thawing out. I remember I was 5 years sober, and I had this friend named Richard Arthen. Turned out that Richard Arthen was going to be my first friend to die of AIDS, my first friend of probably 200 who died of AIDS. And I remember I was 5 years sober, and he said to me, "Get over here, I have your present." And I went over, and what he had bought me was this huge cymbidium orchid plant with a lot of orchids on it. And he said, "Honey, this is your corsage because you never went to the prom." I know, and it's so sweet, really, don't you think so? And sweet doesn't bother me anymore. I don't cringe so much anymore with that kind of stuff. But anyway, I came to the program first time July or August of 1974. I had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. It certainly wasn't in the media. Rock bands hadn't already started breaking their anonymity en masse in People magazine. I hadn't, it wasn't really, it was still sort of a secret underground organization. But Central Office in Los Angeles used to put this card up on late night TV. It wasn't a commercial. It was just, a card, like one single thing, a page, and it said, "Do you have a drinking problem?" And there was a telephone number, and it was for Central Office in Los Angeles. And we by the way, have one of the few 24-hour manned, all the time manned and womaned central offices in the U.S. There's somebody there 24 hours a day. And I called. It was late night. I'd come out sort of a fog, and this thing was on the TV, and I don't know why I called that particular night, but I called. I knew I had a drinking problem. I knew I drank too much. So what? Everybody I knew drank too much. But I knew I drank too much, and I knew it was a problem, but I didn't know that there was anything to do about it. And they offered to send somebody to take me to a meeting, and I said, "Oh, no, thank you. I'll get there myself." And I started going to meetings in 1974, and I'm not going to say that I slipped. I never slipped. I just never really got sober. And thank God that we have, you talked about it, Patty talked about it last night, that we have the third tradition, which the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And I love it. Because of the proliferation of treatment centers, you don't see a lot of drunks in the meetings anymore. So sometimes there's one in the meeting and people are going, "Oh my God, there's a drunk in the meeting." And it's like, hello? That book is called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not called Mental Health Anonymous, and it's like if everybody could get sober before they walk through the door, we'd probably have no reason to have any meetings, But, I remember I was secretary of this big meeting in Beverly Hills in 1985, the Rodeo meeting. What a nightmare, to be secretary. But I was secretary of this meeting, and I had this greeter. His name was Wayne. And Wayne got drunk. And he showed up at the meeting to do his commitment, and he said, "I can't greet, I'm drunk." I said, "Get at the door anyway." I said it'll be good for him. And I have to tell you, Wayne's never had another drink since. And he credits me with saving his life. He showed up for his commitment, so I told him he could greet. I didn't ask him to speak. I just told him to greet. And he hasn't had a drink since, so, you never know. But anyway, so I went to meetings, and sometimes I was drunk, and sometimes I wasn't, and, and they let me stay. But when the holidays rolled around in 1974, I thought to myself, you are not sober anyway. What exactly would be the point of sticking around this outfit? So I left for the holidays with some vague plan to come back right after the first of the year, but my birthday is March 3rd, so it took a little longer than I anticipated. My plans very rarely ever worked out. My mother would invite me to dinner when she was speaking to me, and sometimes I'd show up, and other times I'd run into somebody on the way, and they would say, "Would you like to go to Mexico?" And I'd get in the car. And, and then somehow 3 days later, I'd be trying to explain to my mother, that I had a little detour, to Husong's, and I just couldn't quite make it. But anyway, making a medication run over the border. Anyhow, I had a therapist Now, I'm not here to talk against therapy. Our book has no argument with therapy. I've benefited greatly from therapy since I've been sober, particularly since I learned how to tell the truth. But therapy, by the way, has never been the treatment for my alcoholism. The only treatment I have ever employed for my alcoholism is Alcoholics Anonymous, but I've had other issues that I've gone to talk to a therapist about, and on more than one occasion. But this particular therapist, I'd had a long line of them. And each one was weirder than the last, and because I was always trying to unravel, as my sponsor calls, the fascinating mystery of me. And because it was fascinating, let me tell you. And anyway, this guy's name was Sid. He was blind, and we used to smoke dope and neck during my sessions. And needless to say, I was getting an enormous amount of help from Sid, and Sid persuaded me to go to this place called the Benneville Pines, which is a Unitarian church camp in the San Bernardino Mountains, so she knows. Now, the Unitarians are not like Southern Baptists. They're a notoriously loose bunch, and Sid told me that Sid persuaded me to go after telling me they'd have a great deal of liquor at the Benneville Pines, and certainly they did, which, was a good thing because I would have killed him otherwise, and because I was stuck up in the mountains with no car. And anyway, I got very drunk that weekend, and I ended up spending the entire weekend having a three-way with two sex therapists from Carpinteria, California, whose names were Bert and Sally. I don't know why I remembered this, but I'm certain I filed it away for future reference. Now, I got sober 2 months later and never looked them up, but which is not to say that I got good, but I just never looked them up. And anyway, I came back 2 months after that, and I came back for two reasons, I'm sure. I came back because I was tired. I'm going to be 55 this month, and I have to tell you, I look younger now than I did when I was 24 when I got sober. I'm thrilled to be 55. I qualify for the senior dinner at Denny's, and I have to tell you, I can't wait to go in there and get carded. It'll be so nostalgic, but anyhow, yeah, I turned 50. My mother signed me up to join AARP. Thanks, Ma. Started getting mail from them. Anyway, I came back because I was tired, and I came back because I had gotten that perception of Alcoholics Anonymous, that it was a safe and decent place, and I've never lost that perception to this day. I really love being in the safety of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's fantastic. Which is not to say that I don't venture out. I certainly do. But anyway, I was very lucky because I came back on March 3rd of 1975, and on March 4th, I went to a meeting at the old Radford Clubhouse in North Hollywood, California, home of Alabama Carruthers, grateful alcoholics. She was really God. We had these women when I got sober. I used to refer to them as the great old broads of AA, and they all seemed to be from the South. They'd all been married like 75 times. And, I finally figured out why I've never been married, by the way. Some of the women in AA have simply used up all the husbands. But anyhow, they had these... I mean, don't you women know how to date, for God's sake? I'm sure when, you must have some wild story, because when I was new, the women with 20 years, they all had these crazy stories, and just fantastic stories. And, and I decided I'd never be a great old broad because I didn't have big enough hair and I wasn't from the South. But there's a new generation of, this is the face of the new old timer. Here it is, and... Anyway, I'm sort of a mid-timer. I'll never be an old-timer because, the old-timers, there are more of them coming up. But anyhow, and I'm glad to be a mid-timer, let me tell you. Anyway, I went to this meeting at Radford, and I ran into Bob Earl, and he became my first sponsor, very reluctantly, by the way, but he'd seen me around the year before. And he backed me up against the wall in that clubhouse, and he said to me, "Look, punk," he said, "you have a serious problem with alcohol and drugs, and you better damn well get sober, or you're going to die." And then he said, if you don't get sober, I'm going to break your jaw. Now, I don't know what you would have thought. I thought he cares. I'd heard that, and I wanted to know why. I took his telephone number, which was a miracle because lots of people had given me their numbers the year before. I had not called one of those people. But I called him. And the true miracle was I called him a second time because completely unsolicited by me, he started telling me what to do. Now, I don't know what you're like, but I don't like people telling me what to do, especially if I have not asked you. But fortunately for me, everyone up to and including my sponsor, Julie C., the Great White Goddess, she who must be obeyed, it's her full name, have not cared one whit how I have felt about the direction that they are giving me. They really don't care. They sort of presume that if I want what they have, maybe I'd like to try doing what they did in order to get it. And the truth of the matter is, when we say if you want what we have, it's going to be your own version of whatever it is that we have. Not everybody comes to Alcoholics Anonymous in the same condition. Not everybody progresses at the same rate. This is not a competition sport. It's not. And I hate that thing about, well, what was it like for you at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? I don't know. When I was 5 years sober, I was involved with a practicing alcoholic who tried to strangle me. I don't recommend it. And I doubt that any of you necessarily are going to have the exact same experience. What I will tell you is I stayed sober through that. That's what I'll tell you. I'm not proud of it. It's just what happened, And anyway, Bobby became my sponsor, and he never wanted to sponsor me. He spent 5 years trying to get rid of me, but I wouldn't go. And, because he didn't sponsor women, but he sponsored me and one other girl, mainly because he had no interest in having sex with either one of us. But anyway, it's true. What can I say? I was always really bummed about that, but that's how it goes. And anyhow, I got involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have never not been involved. The things that he told me to do were to go to 7 to 9 meetings a week and sit in the front row and be responsible for my chair and my ashtray and thank speakers whether I thought they had anything to say or not. That was important. He told me that I had to get a big book and I might try reading it. He told me that I should get a commitment. And he told me that I was basically useless, but I had a car and I could drive other people to meetings. And I tried to explain to him how that would be a really bad idea because I didn't like people. And I didn't want them in my car because what the hell was I going to say to them when they got in there? And fortunately for me, he didn't care. He said, put them in the car, point it in the direction of the meeting. Chances are you will both get there. And I started getting involved with the people of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I have to tell you, even up to and including this, today, I'm not a real people person, okay? I'm just not. I'm not, I look like I know everybody, but it's really more that a lot of people know me. I finally figured out my personality type. I'm a gregarious loner. That's what I am. I like to be out in public for periods of time, and then I just simply want to go home. And, I was in my room until noon today. I was ecstatic, just to be by myself. I don't isolate. It's not isolation. I just like to be alone sometimes because my whole life is filled with people. I work full time. I still go to 3-4 meetings a week. I sponsor people. I speak. I go around. I have a big social life. But, I like to be home when I can be home. And I have probably 5 or 6 good friends and a lot of acquaintances, and I think that's all anybody can really expect in their lifetime. I have a relationship. It's a very difficult relationship. I've been with this man on and off for 20 years. And this time we're together for 3 years, and he's a periodic alcoholic. And I'd like to stand up here and tell you that I feel great about that. I don't, but we don't pick who we love. And I go to Al-Anon, and they tell me that, it's not a crime to love an alcoholic. And I wish he could get sober, and he doesn't want to come to AA. And he says that he's 55 and he's too old. And I know that he's not too old, but you know what? I don't know how he feels. And I finally realized that in the last couple of weeks, is that I really don't know how it feels to be 55. And having drank for, the last 40 to 45 years of your life, and how it feels to think about having to live without it after all of that time, really it's none of my business. What's my business is whether I choose to stay or go. That's my business. And for today, I choose to stay. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay forever because I don't know anything. When I was new, I was not issued a crystal ball or a magic 8-ball or the ability to predict anything. There's no way to predict anything. And I used to think, that you could get your life, if you stayed here long enough, you'd get your life wrapped up in some neat, box with a pretty ribbon and nothing would ever seep out the edges and nothing bad would ever happen. And boy, I'll tell you what, if you think that's true, you're in for a shock, because I think God has a way of flinging what I call the celestial monkey wrench into your business just to see if you're paying attention. And I've gotten some whoppers. I've gotten some whoppers. On July 4th of 1996, I was sitting on my couch, drinking a cup of coffee, staring out my west-facing view, towards the ocean. Trying to get my heart started, thinking that, eventually I'd get off my butt and go to the store and get the stuff for the salad that I'd promised to bring to the barbecue later that afternoon. And my telephone rang and my entire life changed in an instant. It was a woman. And she said, "My name is Julie Jones, and I'm a private search investigator from Seattle, Washington, and I've been asked to locate you." And I had no idea why she was calling. And then she said, "Is your name Ilene Waterstone?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Does the date March 28th, 1969 mean anything to you?" And then I knew. It's my son. Was born on March 28th, 1969. I was 45 years old. He was 27 by my calculations. I started to cry. I said, "Is he in Seattle?" She says, "Oh, no, we do this by computer. He's living in your area code." My son lived a mile and a half away from me 27 years later. I called him up she said, "Can I give him your number?" I said, "No." I said, "Give me his, call him back, tell him I'm going to call him when I've picked my stomach off the floor." I called my parents who were not home, thank God. I called my sponsor who was home, thank God. I called a couple of close friends. I called some friends who had adopted kids, and I called a couple of friends who were adoptees. And then I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, "My name is Ilene Waterstone, and I understand you're looking for me." In our very first conversation, he told me that he had been in a rehab. I was shocked. I thought, oh, what the hell? So I said, "Hey, what a remarkable coincidence." I said, "I have 21 years in Alcoholics Anonymous." And I could sort of hear him on the other end of the line going, "Oh, God, she knows." Oh, shit, I'm busted, Because he wasn't currently sober. And the truth of the matter is, the last 10 years that I've known him, he's currently not been sober most of the time. I thought it was going to be my great AA story, and it's been my great AA mixed nightmare story. He's one of us. He's come and gone in the program. Every guy that I know has tried to help him. And, I was sitting down there thinking, AA really is for those who need it and not for those who want it and not for those who need it. God knows my son needs the program. At 35, he'd had a heart attack. He'd actually had a couple of heart attacks, but for the 2 years prior to that, he was so loaded, he just ignored it. But he had a heart attack. He had double bypass surgery. They told him if he ever used speed again, he'd probably die, and since that time, he's used speed again. It's the disease. It's the disease, and, I pray for him. I'm always glad to see him in a meeting, but other than that, I don't really want to talk to him. I've gotten some crazy phone calls from him. He's very large. I'm afraid of him when he's loaded, and I don't want him around me. I have a grandson that I haven't seen in 2 years because in order to see him, I have to see the parents, and I'm not ready to interact with him. And it's interesting because I saw him in a meeting last Tuesday at my home group, and he was there with his sponsor, who I'm taken to calling Saint Mickey because he's really trying to help my son. And he keeps saying to me, I mean, this has been like years, he keeps saying, I'm on my 4th step. And, the next time I see him and he says it, I'm going to say, why don't you get the hell off the 4th step, finish it, and go on to the 5th step, and maybe you'll stay sober. And I've decided I'm not going to keep my mouth shut next time. Whatever Al-Anon says, I don't care. I'm just going to say it. Because for God's sake, somebody needs to tell him the truth, and let's get on with it. Work those steps. Something might actually happen. Because he says he's tried the program. He never has, because he hasn't worked the steps, and anyway, I progressed along in Alcoholics Anonymous, and, life was life, and life, kept presenting itself in many different ways, and, I've had terrible times, and I have had amazing, wonderful times. I have traveled all over the United States and all over the world. I've had marvelous experiences, and I try to go to meetings everywhere I go. I love to go to meetings in other places. The cadence of the Lord's Prayer might be a little different. They might do it a little differently, but it's, it's the same thing. It's the language of the heart. Those banners, the things that we have on the wall with the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. Sometimes they're in Indonesian, and sometimes they're in Spanish, and sometimes they're in Hebrew, and it's amazing. I mean, I've had many amazing trips, but by far the most interesting one was the one that I took to Israel in 1987. I went over there with somebody I was working for. She went over there to make a movie. And I was in Israel for 6 weeks, and what a fantastic experience. I know that a lot of you come from small towns, so you may not identify with this, but I come from Los Angeles, where there's, like 2,800 meetings a week in Los Angeles. And I always love when people say, I can't find a meeting I like, and so I hand them our meeting directory, which looks like a novelette, and I tell them to go to every single meeting in the directory and then come back and tell me that they can't find one they don't like. I've done the simple mathematics. If they go to a meeting every day, it'll take them approximately 7 years. And during that time, they might find a meeting they like, and you won't have to listen to their whining, because they'll be long gone. But in Israel, you take what you can get. I went to a women's stag on Wednesdays. If we were lucky, we had 4 people. I went out to visit some weird loners from Albuquerque on the West Bank. They were very strange. And then I went to NA meetings in a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv, because by far NA is the strongest of the programs in Israel. And how I got to those meetings was that before I went to Israel, I had a crisis whose name I can't currently remember. And my sponsor was doing a play in Arizona, and I couldn't find her, so I called Bobby Earl, who I hadn't talked to in about 3 years, and he said, well, of course you called me. I have to give you Nancy and Bob Wilson's phone number in Tel Aviv. And he had met them in Hawaii, but they'd moved to Tel Aviv, and they were in the program. And I called this woman, Nancy, when I got there. I was in Jerusalem, which is about 45 minutes away, and I called her up, and she said, I know who you are. And I said, how do you know who I am? And she said, about a month ago, somebody sent a bunch of AA tapes over here, and one of them was yours. Anyway, but that's how it always happens. That's how it always happens. And anyway, I went and visited with her on the weekend. She saved my life while I was there. I mean, it wasn't what I was used to. It's hard to be there. And when I came back to the States, she and Bob split up, and she moved to Santa Monica, which is essentially Los Angeles, and I was able to return the favor, and that's how it works. And while I was there, I gave a talk. It was translated from English into Hebrew by a native German-speaking woman. I have no idea what they heard. Honestly, I don't. I go to Israel. The first people I meet are a German girl and her Japanese boyfriend, Dido, who had been a Zen Buddhist monk, but no longer. And anyway, about 2 years later, I'm sleeping at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning. My telephone rings, and it's this guy. And he goes, my name is Avner. I met you in Israel. I'm in Spring Valley, New York. Do you know where there's an NA meeting? And I think, I don't even know where Spring Valley is. But I said, I'll try and help you. So I got up and I called Central Office of Narcotics Anonymous in New York City, an experience that I hope all of you have someday. And guy answers the phone. He goes, hi, I'm Joey. I'm an addict. And I think, shut up. Who isn't? Because I'm a genetic New Yorker. Anyway, I told him about Avner, and I guess he called them, and Nancy got remarried, and she went back to Israel to the bomb shelter, and there was Avner, and he was clean, so maybe I helped him. Anyway, while I was in Israel, I went to Egypt. Why? Because you can. And I got on a plane, and I flew to Egypt for 2 fun-filled days. You know, Denial is not really a river in Egypt, I'll tell you. And anyway, but I stayed at Denial Hilton, and I took a belly dancing cruise on the river, and I went to, the museum, and I shopped, and I rode a camel, and I touched the Sphinx, and I went inside the pyramids. And remember, I used to not be able to get off the floor. Now I'm riding a camel, and I have the pictures to prove it. And anyway, I'm there for like 2 days. Now, Egypt is amazing. I mean, being in a taxi in Cairo is like being on a fun-filled ride from hell. You know, it's like, there's no lanes, and there's like some traffic signals, but everybody ignores them, and everybody honks, and all the cars are dented and scratched, and it's about 190 degrees. You think it's hot in here? Go to Egypt. Anyway, and by the end of the second day, I am half dead. And I am laying in the perfume palace in Giza, which is where the Sphinx and the big pyramids are, not to be confused with the papyrus palace. They're 2 entirely different things. I'm laying there under a fan trying to revive myself, and a guy I have never seen before in my life comes up to me. I'm 12 and a half years sober, and he says, "Would you like some hashish?" And I think I'm in Egypt. Who would know? And then I think you would. And you had better get your butt back to that bomb shelter in Tel Aviv, even if you don't understand anything they're saying, because the disease never sleeps. Ever. And the minute I forget that I have this disease, I am in serious trouble. The minute I forget, which is one of the main reasons why I continue to go to meetings. I have 4 reasons why I go to meetings. I go to meetings because I need them. I am not one of those people who has ever been able to labor under the illusion that I do not need Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I am grateful that I know that. I go to meetings because I like them. I have a really big life. I have a really interesting life. I know a lot of people. I have an interesting job. I have friends who are not in the program. I do things. I go places. But the people that are closest to me, the people that I love the most in my life, are all members of this fellowship, and they all feel as passionately about it as I do. The third reason why I go to meetings is because, as my sponsor, Julie C., the Great White Goddess, she who must be obeyed, says, that's where they keep the newcomers. Not being in the habit of going to bars, I find mine here. And the fourth and final reason why I go to meetings is because most of the time I look and act less than an alcoholic than I ever have in my whole entire life. It's not like I would walk down the street and anybody would point at me and say, "Ooh, see that big drunk," not like in the old days when I'd be laying in the street. And so I go to meetings because I want to remember that the only reason why I have the life that I have today, the job that I have today, the relationship with my family, the relationship, the respect of my peers, the respect that I have for others, everything that I have that's worth having in my life that's decent is as a result of being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and for no other reason. I want to tell you one more story and then I'll shut up. About 3 years ago, I was in a terrible rut. I was very depressed. A lot of things that had happened. A woman that I considered to be one of my mentors had died in the hospital in front of me. My grandson had been born and brought up the birth of my son all over again. I'd had my hip replaced. I turned 50 and the warranty ran out on my left hip, and I was having a lot of physical problems, and I couldn't be physically active in the way that I like to be. And, lots of things had happened, and I got very, very depressed. And once again, I sought out the help of a therapist because I just needed somebody to talk to on a regular basis who would sit there for an hour because I was paying her. She had to listen to me. And she was giving me some help. And, but I was also, really cranking it up on the spiritual life. I mean, I was back to reading the book regularly, and I was, reading a lot of other, literature. I was reading like 5 daily reflection books, and I was listening to spiritual tapes in my car, and I was going here and going there, because the truth of the matter is, I'm going to bring in all the guns when I need the help. I'm going to do whatever it is that I need to do. And I was in this terrible rut, and I prayed for God to bring me something to inspire me. And about 2 weeks later, a friend of mine came to me and he says, I'm casting this little production of Company, which is a Stephen Sondheim musical. And he said, and I'm looking for somebody to play Joanne. Now, the truth of the matter is, I'm not much of an actress, but I'm a hell of a singer. And he knew this. I had done some charity stuff with him and some singing with him. And anyway, the part of Joanne, she's the drunk, acerbic one, the one that Elaine Stritch played in the original production. She sings a song called The Ladies Who Lunch, which is one of the bitterest drunken anthems there is. And anyway, he cast me in this part, and because I know how to show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I showed up to all the rehearsals. And I tried to be a worker among worker, and an actor among actors, and a singer among singers. And there were actually several people from the program involved. And I learned my lines, and I did what I was told. And I was directed because I'm used to taking direction, and we did this show, and I didn't know it was this little theater on the east side of L.A., and the Los Angeles Times came and they reviewed the show, and of all the people in the show, they singled me out, and they said that my rendition of The Ladies Who Lunch was sublime. But of course, by far, my favorite review was the one in Backstage West, which is a little trade rag that said Eileen Waterstone is perfect as the drunk, acerbic Joanne. And I thought to myself, how did I do that? How did I do that? And the other great thing that happened, there was a girl named Amanda in the show, and she had about 12 years in the program, and my boss had this big showbiz thing to do, and so I couldn't work one weekend, and that was the weekend that Variety, this other big trade rag, came, and they gave her a wonderful review as my stand-in, and I came back and I see the review on the wall, and my first instinct is, oh God, that's my part, and she got my review, and then I thought, oh, shut up. It's like Amanda wants to be an actor. You don't want to be an actor. You're doing this for a laugh. Let her have the good review. And she had gone to the Dominican Republic on vacation. And when she came back, I was genuinely able to say to her, you know what, Amanda, I'm so happy you got that nice review, and I'm so happy. Because Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the ability to be happy for the good fortune of others. Isn't that a gift? Isn't that a gift? Anyway, I am so lucky. I'm a good daughter. I'm a good friend. I'm a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm far from perfect. I'm extremely fallible. I'm very human. I still need these programs. I still need to work the steps. I still need to have conscious contact with my higher power, whatever that is. But I consider myself to be an enormously fortunate individual that after 31 years, I'm still able to be here and to be in the warm embrace of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says in our book, when all else fails, help another alcoholic. I really hope I've done that tonight. Thanks for having me.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control is connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.